Hey there, Comics Alliance fans. This is Matt Wilson, co-host and producer of the War Rocket Ajax podcast. I'm here once again to introduce a clip from next week's episode of War Rocket Ajax. This time around, I'm actually welcoming guest co-host David Wolkin. You may remember him from the Batman Odyssey reviews here at Comics Alliance that he co-wrote with Laura Hudson. Chris is at Emerald City Comic Con this week, so we welcomed David. David and I talked about 3 brand new comics that came out this past week. They were Manhattan Projects number 19, Ghost Rider, all new Ghost Rider number 1, and Real Heroes number 1. What you're about to hear are our reviews of those 3 books. Come back on Monday to warrocketajax.com to hear the full episode, which includes checks and recs from David and myself and an interview segment where we reunite the team behind the Batman Odyssey reviews, David Wolkin and Laura Hudson. And we all talk about our comics origin stories. We talk about how we got into comic books. It's a really good episode. I think you're going to like it, even without Chris Sims, who will be back next week after he gets back from Emerald City. But for now, enjoy this clip of our comics reviews from this week's episode. I generally keep up with Manhattan Projects in trade paperbacks. I do not often read it issue by issue, but I read this one. It was number 19, and kind of a one-shot story anyway, that even for this series was very abstract, in that it mostly took place inside Robert Oppenheimer's brain.
But really Joseph Oppenheimer's brain.
That's right, yes. If you were not familiar with the Manhattan Projects, a story that was set up in the very first issue is that the Robert Oppenheimer of this comic shares a brain with his serial killer brother Joseph. And they're constantly at war with each other inside of his head. It's a concept that hooked me into the series, to be quite honest.
Right.
And it's now in issue 19 paying that off.
Yeah. And this is not meant as a critique. This is it's basically like fan fiction about the greatest scientists of the 20th century, taken to an insane extent of just imagining how they would all interact with each other in a certain way, assuming they were all just awful human beings.
Well, I think you could call it, what would the greatest scientist of the 20th century be like if they were mad scientists?
This is one of few comics that I've actually followed on a monthly basis from the minute it came out. And you know what I enjoy about Hickman in general is that I never feel like he's making it up as he goes along. You know, he always knows exactly what's going to happen from the minute he starts a story. And so the payoffs feel like they're pretty organic, and they weren't just like, oh, this will make sense right now. And if that's not how he does things, bravo, because it really does feel that way. The way he's gone with each of these characters and just imagining the sort of the lunacy that they've created together and how it sort of, backfires on them in various ways but still keeps moving forward. I'm pretty stuck on it.
The thing about Hickman's work, especially over the last few years, is that it really feels like he's been aiming for just big feeling stories and ideas. And I'm not sure that it always works in his superhero stuff, but it tends to work pretty well in his creator-owned stuff. And I would say Manhattan Projects is the one that feels the most operatic. That is in every page of this issue. The artist on this issue is not the regular artist of the Manhattan Projects, Nick Pitara. It's actually Ryan Browne, who did God Hates Astronauts.
Oh.
And it's really interesting, his art, because it's in the style of the comic, but it's also maybe a little more clean than the style of art that you usually get in this comic. And it's kind of intentionally grimy and dirty a lot of the time. And I think it fits in with the rest of the issues very well. I think if you were reading this in trade, you might not even notice the changeover.
Right.
But I think it's really interesting that not only is this an issue with a different artist on it, but it's kind of got a little bit of a different feel to it in that it is entirely taking place in this microcosm of one guy's brain, or two guys' brain, if you want to put it that way. Because we don't see the real world until maybe the last 2 or 3 pages when Einstein comes into the picture. It's really interesting. As a single issue of comics, it's amazingly kind of crazily self-contained.
And I might be totally wrong about this, and I'm going to look it up if the universe will bear with me. But I have a recollection that the end of issue 19 is the same as the end of issue 18. Yes, the issues end in the same exact way. So I don't have to worry about spoilers as much. But what happens in issue 19 is basically everything that's going on in Oppenheimer's head leading up to the very end of issue 18. And now that I'm remembering that, because I was reading this and I was like, wait a minute, I remember this happening before, but really it's just the last couple of pages of the comic. But then the way it's told is it actually just it sort of regresses briefly and it just takes another track of what's going on here and it goes inside Oppenheimer's head. And I think that, I enjoy that from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to show overlapping events. It's a storytelling device that I don't think always works. It's one that Lost used a lot.
Too much, maybe?
Where, it'd be like one episode would end where the previous one ended, and you're like, just move along. But when it's used somewhat sparingly, and when you get, like, kind of crazy mindscape stories like this one, I think it's pretty good. Next up, I think we should probably talk about all-new Ghost Rider #1.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Chris actually reviewed this comic on Comics Alliance, so I'll put a link to the show notes to that review. But I'd like to know what you thought of this issue, David.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. I don't read comics in the same way that I used to, though I'm still, I feel like, up on what's going on to a certain extent because I watch people complain on Twitter. But, I picked up all new Ghost Rider #1. I read it on the bus to New York yesterday, and I dug it. Felipe Smith, I read all 3 volumes of Pipo Chu, his sort of, it's been a while. I suggest you Google it, and I don't even know how I would begin to explain that comic, but this guy's got skills. I really enjoyed this comic, and it looks fantastic. Only because I'm obsessed with the Fast and the Furious, I feel like this tries to capitalize on that zeitgeist a little bit, and I'm totally okay with that.
It may be a couple years late for that.
It's never too late for that.
I think as a trend jumping thing, street racing may have had its moment, because even the Fast and the Furious movies are not really about that anymore.
You don't turn your back on family.
They're about big heists and stuff now, more than the street racing community. But outside of feeling maybe a tad dated, I'm right there with you on this issue. Marvel put out 2 #1 issues this week that I think are both characterized by extremely beautiful art. Like Trad Moore's art in this issue is mind-blowing. Like how exciting he can make a car chase on a comics page.
Yeah.
It is well known to be one of the hardest things to do in comics, to make a car chase exciting, and he does it very well. This issue came out, and Silver Surfer #1 came out with art by Mike Allred. And both of those issues just have incredibly stunning art. But they both have really, really different storytelling approaches. Silver Surfer #1 is just throwing events at you from page 1. It's just stuff happening all the time.
Who wrote it?
That was Dan Slott.
Okay.
And I think that's partially because people know who Silver Surfer is. They know his background. This is an issue that is introducing an entirely new Ghost Rider and introducing you to his life and his situation. And it's one of those things where you don't see him turn into Ghost Rider until almost the last page, maybe the next to the last page. And I think that's okay here. I'm not always a fan of that. I'm not always a fan of the #1 issue where the last page reveal is the title character in his or her costume. But Marvel has released 2 comics that do that in the past couple months, because this does it and Ms. Marvel does it. And I think both comics show that that can be done really well because they can introduce you to really, really compelling characters.
How do you feel about him being in the car?
Rather than in a motorcycle?
Yeah.
Or on a motorcycle? I think that's fine. I mean, I think if you're going to make Ghost Rider a new person, like this is yet another Ghost Rider, all those other Ghost Riders have ridden motorcycles.
Right.
Why not have one that drives a car?
I don't know. I mean, I guess that otherwise it would imply that there's a demon somewhere who's like, listen, dude, if I'm going to possess you, it's really important that we put you on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Is it something that fans, whatever I believe about fans, is it something that folks are upset about in some world?
I don't know. I haven't read any complaints about it, but yeah. I'm sure there's someone somewhere who's like, Ghost Rider should be on a motorcycle all the time. I think that they should put Ghost Rider in a different vehicle every new series they start.
Hey, well, did you see the last Ghost Rider movie?
I've seen neither of the Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider movies.
Okay, I've seen both of them. And it's because there's very little that will keep me from seeing a movie if people tell me it's bad. I'd be like, I don't care. I'm going to see it. And, the second was directed by Neville Dean and Taylor, the guys who did the Crank movies. It didn't work for a lot of people because it's just a ludicrous movie. And, like, one of the bad guy is, like, the heartthrob boy from Empire Records, which is just pretty funny. But any time Ghost Rider gets into any vehicle, it turns into a Ghost Rider thing. So at some point, he takes a massive, like, construction machine, and it just bursts into flames, and then he starts destroying people. And I felt like they didn't take it to its logical extent by putting him into every possible vehicle he could fit in. So I know that's not where this series is going, but I actually do have high hopes that at some point someone's just like, anything Ghost Rider sits on becomes a ghost thing and bursts into flames.
Marvel is in this habit now of, like, restarting series with a new number one every couple years, right? If not every year. And I would just like each time Ghost Rider gets rebooted, this time he's got a train. This time he's got a monorail. This time he's got a jet ski.
Oh, man. I want him in a golf cart. I want him on a Segway. I just want him on, like, rollerblades and whatever it is. Like, I want him to, like, take a kid's, like, scooter and just destroy the world with it.
Paddle boat.
Yeah.
Anything he could get.
There's no vehicle that you put him in where it's not, like, hilarious to see that happen.
Yes, I agree. We're coming down on both really liking Ghost Rider, all new Ghost Rider #1, and Trent Moore being just mind-blowing. Like, this guy's art, wow.
But it's another example of people, I think, Marvel being smart enough to hire writers or creators who exist slightly off the proverbial beaten path. Like, Michel Felipe, like, he didn't, Copra definitely got widespread attention, but it was also like, this is someone who's got his own, like, way of thinking and doing this, and it's so, like, appealing and on point. Let's see what happens, what he does with a Marvel comic. And I feel like the same thing, Felipe Smith, when I read Pipochu, I was just like, this is unlike anything else I've ever read. So to see someone who's thinking like that coming to a Marvel comic, like, Images in their own world, I feel like this is somewhere where DC hasn't caught up, or at least they've forgotten, where it's just like, find someone with creative vision and don't really put a lot of limits on them. Let them do what they want to do, and it's going to pay off.
I actually think, to that point, I think this issue takes a lot of risks. Like, there's a word that gets used in this issue that could have potentially been a huge problem appearing in a Marvel comic. Just so people know what it is. Just so people will know what it is. There's a scene where the new Ghost Rider's, he's his little brother, right?
Yeah, it's his little brother.
His little brother is being taunted by some bullies, and they're calling him a retard. And the fact that this issue includes that word, it seems really risky to me, even though it is mean kids who are bullies saying it. The fact that the word is in the issue at all kind of blew me away. It made me feel a little strange.
Look, to me, I think it was illustrative and it's something that, ignorant people make this mistake where they see someone with a physical disability and they automatically assume that person also has a mental impairment.
Right.
And that's where these ignorant, bullying fools went. And that's obviously not what was going down here. And I know people who've been in that experience, and it's like that much more frustrating, where it's like, my body, I've issues, like my body doesn't work the way I hope it would work. And there are people who are dumb enough to think that it somehow affects the way I think and interact and behave.
It's really expertly deployed in the scene. And I think it's really risky, and the fact that Marvel let it happen. I mean, you could say they just weren't paying attention, but I think somebody was watching this pretty hard, and the fact that they let it happen is really interesting and kind of commendable, I think. Because there have been words that have slipped through in comics before where it's like, how in the world could you let this slip through? So I'm sure there was a lot of hand-wringing about it before it came out. The last comic that we're going to talk about is a new Image series written and drawn by Bryan Hitch called Real Heroes. The first issue just came out, and this is just basically Galaxy Quest with superheroes. Did we both get that impression?
I didn't read it. I'm sorry.
I'll just dig into it for a second. I don't really know what else to say about it other than it is Galaxy Quest with superheroes. It's this group of actors who are in a very Avengers-like movie, and then they find themselves in a real situation where the world is at risk and they have to become a superhero team. It feels a lot like the Ultimates, not only because it's got Bryan Hitch art, but just because of the story itself. A huge chunk of the first issue is just taken up with the comic being a scene from the fictional movie in the fictional world. And you definitely get the impression that this is what the comic is going to be, and it feels really strange and hokey. It's maybe like 8 pages in that it finally says, oh no, this is a movie, and these people are actors. I don't know how to feel about it. I kind of don't have like a really extreme, passionate feeling of hatred toward it, but I don't like it. Partially because it is a concept that is in a really well-regarded movie. And I think part of the problem is that Galaxy Quest is really funny. And this comic equates comedy with characters bickering with one another in a way that may work if it was dialogue that an actor was saying, but doesn't really pop off the page all that well.
It's still, look, I know, I didn't read it. I'm looking at a preview right now, and I know Hitch is a frequent collaborator, Mark Millar. It still sounds pretty Mark Miller-y.
It absolutely has a Mark Millar feel to it. I don't know if this could be a case of Mark Millar like ghost co-writing a comic with Bryan Hitch, or Bryan Hitch just trying to emulate Mark Millar. It certainly has that feel to it.
I still do love the Ultimates, though, as much as a lot of people still have a problem with it. I love those comics.
I think they exist in kind of a time capsule. It's hard to take them out of the 2003, 2004 time period that they were coming out in. That said, they are the perfect comics for their time.
Mm.
They seized the moment really, really well. I think none of the Ultimate series really lived up to their potential by the end. Like, they just turned into big superhero fights when the series had kind of just established itself as not your regular superhero comic at the beginning. That said, I think they do work, especially in their early issues. And Real Heroes absolutely has that feel of those comics in every way.
Is it big and dumb?
Yes.
Is that...
it is definitely big and dumb.
I mean, I don't, look, with Mark Millar, not to change the subject, though I'm doing that, I think he gets that. He's like, if I keep this big and dumb, it will sell. And then I only have to write 3 issues of it, and then it will get optioned, and then I make a lot of money. I think he knows that very explicitly. I also enjoy big and dumb things, because I enjoyed Ghost Rider getting into a giant construction machine and setting it on fire. So, I don't represent the best of the nation's tastes.
I'm not saying that I don't think Hitch knows that this is a big and dumb comic, too. And I don't doubt that he may have pitched it as Galaxy Quest with superheroes.
Mm.
But that's what it is.
But when you say it that way, it sounds a lot better.
Yeah. It's all about presentation. That's it for this week's War Rocket Ajax clip, fans. Be sure to tune in next week for another clip from War Rocket Ajax. It's going to be War Rocket Ajax number 200, which is a big deal. To check out War Rocket Ajax number 199, which is the current episode, go to warrocketajax.com on Monday to hear the whole thing with myself, David Wolkin, and Laura Hudson. Think you're going to like it? See you then, everybody.